I have been an archivist for 31 years. Before that, I was a field cataloger for 11. Before that, a junior records clerk in a transit office that smelled of coolant and old binding resin. In those 42 years, I have opened perhaps 60,000 sealed records. I have read accounts of wars, of plagues, of the kind of bureaucratic failure that kills 600,000 people because 3 forms were filed in the wrong sequence. I have read confessions written in the hour before execution and depositions, taken from the only surviving member of a crew of 200. I am not a man who loses sleep over documents. I lost sleep over this one. My name is Vale Dross, and I hold the designation Senior Archivist, tier within the conclave of accumulated records, Orvith Sector. The record before me. Conclave reference KV7 Incident Skarath, sealed by joint order of the Orvith Sector Council and the Veth Scareth Dominion Trade Liaison 40 years ago. Was transferred to my department 6 months before my retirement, along with a terse administrative note, suggesting I complete its assessment before I left. The note was signed by a deputy administrator I have never met. It did not explain why the record had been sealed, or why it was being unsealed now, why I specifically was being asked to assess it. Administrative notes rarely do. It took me 4 months to read through it in full. I am not a slow reader. The record is simply very long, and a significant portion of it is audio-visual. Bridge recordings, sensor logs, encrypted signal intercepts, and 7 hours of debriefing footage shot aboard a Veth Scareth medical vessel called the Endless Mercy, which arrived in the KL Vor outer transit corridor approximately 9 hours after the incident concluded. The depositions recorded on that vessel are the only first-person Veth Scareth accounts that exist. Everyone else who might have given one did not survive to do so. What follows is my formal assessment of the record. I am required by conclave protocol to present it neutrally, without editorial embellishment, citing sources by their reference codes so that any subsequent archivist may locate the originals. I will do my best. I should say, however, that I do not think neutrality is fully achievable here, and that I suspect the people who sealed this record understood that. Neutrality requires that the facts be of the kind which can be stated plainly without producing an effect in the reader. Some facts are not of that kind. I will begin with what the Veth Scareth Dominion believed, because what they believed is important to understanding what they did. And what they did is, in the end, what this record is about. Scareth Dominion is a mid-tier expansion power. They hold 11 systems outright and maintain extraction agreements in 7 others. Their military doctrine is organized around what their own internal documents call the principle of overwhelming local advantage, a phrase that translates poorly but means, essentially, that you do not engage an enemy unless you have assembled enough force in one place to make the outcome certain before the first shot is fired. It is a conservative doctrine. It works well against opponents who share the same general assumptions about what constitutes overwhelming force. The Dominion had been aware of humanity for approximately 14 years at the time of the incident. Their intelligence files on human space, copied into the sealed record as Annexure D1 through D17, are thorough and in many respects accurate. Humans are a single-species polity occupying 7 confirmed systems, with the home system designated Kaelvor by Dominion cartography. Human biology is unusual. The record notes their origin world's gravity, atmospheric toxin index, and background radiation level, flags all 3 as elevated relative to galactic baseline. But the Dominion's analysis team had apparently decided that the biological data was less relevant than the military data, and the military data was, on its face, reassuring. Human fleet assets as of 40 years ago numbered in the mid-hundreds. Their largest warships were heavy cruiser class. Their tactical doctrine, as observed in 3 documented frontier engagements against third parties, was conventional by Dominion standards: coordinated lance formations, layered shield architecture, missile salvos at medium range followed by beam weapons at close range. Nothing novel, nothing that warranted reclassification of the threat tier. There was one notation in Annexure D7 that I keep returning to. It is a single paragraph, mid-document, and it reads as follows. The human polity has been assessed as Class 28 biological origin under the Galactic Hazard Registry's planetary classification framework. This designation reflects the origin world's environmental parameters. The classification's operational implications for fleet engagements are not yet formally assessed. The notation is dated 11 years before the incident. In 11 years, no one in the Dominion's intelligence apparatus had followed up on it. Formal assessment was never completed. I note this not to assign blame. The Dominion Intelligence Service was large, and 11 years is a long time for an incomplete task to persist in a queue. But because the absence of that assessment is, in retrospect, the load-bearing fact in everything that follows. The notation's author is identified only by a registration number. I traced the number through the conclave's open cross-reference directories. The author was a junior biological systems analyst, mid-career, who left the Dominion Intelligence Service approximately 2 years after filing the notation and moved into commercial survey work. I did not contact her. It would not have been appropriate, and it would not have changed anything. But I found myself wondering, more than once during my assessment, whether she understood when she wrote that paragraph what she was documenting. Whether she recognized, in the dry procedural language of a mid-document notation, that she had identified a question her organization was not equipped to ask, let alone answer. The question being, in essence, what do you get when you take a species that evolved on a world where everything was trying to kill, and you give it starships and 40 years to figure out what those starships can do? The Dominion's intelligence apparatus had the biological data. They had the planetary parameters, gravity, radiation, atmospheric index, the native predator ecology summary in Annexure D3, which lists 11 apex predator categories on Kael'vor's primary planet, and notes, with what I read is some understatement, that humans occupy the category above all of them. They had everything they needed to ask the question. They simply did not ask it. The file moved on to ship counts and weapons ratings, variables that a military intelligence service knows how to work with, and the notation sat unassessed for 11 years, and Oreth Voss built his engagement model around the variables he had data for, and the variable he didn't have data for was the one that mattered. Class 28. I have checked the registry. As of the current edition, the highest Death World classification in the active database is Class 31. There are 9 of them. Kael'vor's primary planet sits at Class 28. The registry defines Class 28 as follows: a world whose native environmental parameters, gravity, atmospheric composition, temperature range, background ionizing radiation, native predator ecology, represent conditions that would be lethal to the overwhelming majority of known sapient species within a survival window, measured in minutes to hours. Sapient species native to Class 28 environments are accordingly expected to have evolved biological and cognitive adaptations to environmental extremes that have no analog in baseline world populations. The formal assessment of what that means for fleet engagements, had it ever been completed, might have suggested to the Dominion Intelligence Service that humans are not, in any meaningful sense, a comparable opponent, that the standard variables, ship count, weapon yield, shield rating, are necessary but not sufficient data, that there is a variable missing from their files, that the variable is the crew. But the assessment was never completed. So, when Captain Oreth Voss of the Vethskarth Dominion Fleet Arm assembled his 7-ship interdiction lance in the Kael'vor Outer Transit Corridor 40 years ago, he did so in the full confidence that the operation was, in his own words, preserved in the pre-mission briefing recording, Exhibit A3, a straightforward asset acquisition with minimal risk of meaningful resistance. The asset in question was the VDF Meridian, a human frigate of the Valdrith Analog class, registry number 7741, out of the Kael'vor Secondary Depot. The Dominion's intelligence on the Meridian was as follows: displacement roughly equivalent to a Dominion midweight escort. Complement of 41 crew. Primary armament 4 forward-mounted beam projectors and 2 aft-mounted missile launchers. All standard fit, hyperdrive capable. System sensor suite rated adequate for survey work. Mission profile for this particular transit: a navigational survey of the Kael'vor Outer Corridor's debris field, running approximately 9 standard days. Classified by Dominion Intelligence as a non-combat mission. classified as such because it was. Commander Selah Voss had been in the Human Voluntary Defense Force for 19 years. Her record is in the sealed archive as Exhibit C2, provided by the Human Voluntary Defense Force under the Post-Incident Disclosure Agreement. I have read it 3 times. She had held command rank for 6 years. Before that, 2 years as a first officer on a patrol craft in the Kael'vor Inner System. Before that, 4 years as a navigation specialist. Before that, 7 years in the enlisted ranks, starting as an engineering technician, advancing through 6 grades by the time she commissioned. The Dominion Intelligence summary of her record describes her challenge: a logistics and survey specialist with no documented combat command experience. This is technically accurate. It is also, I have come to understand, exactly the kind of description that becomes dangerous when you don't understand. What it means is that Selah Voss had spent 19 years learning, in exacting detail, every system on every ship she served aboard actually worked. Not how it was supposed to work, how it actually worked, under load, under failure, under conditions that were not in the manual. She had spent 19 years aboard spacecraft, which are, in their way, environments not entirely unlike the world that made her, closed, unforgiving, indifferent to error, lethal to the unprepared. She had not commanded a warship in a fleet engagement. That is true. What she had done is harder to quantify and harder to find in a file. Vise did not find it in his file. He saw a survey frigate, a logistics officer, a crew of 41. He saw 7-to-1 odds. He moved his lance into position and began the encirclement at approximately 0340 hours Kael'vor local reference time on the 42nd day of the Meridian survey mission. He did not hail the Meridian first. Pre-mission briefing recording, Exhibit A3, contains his rationale. A hail allows the target to begin preparation. We have the advantage of surprise. We use it. This is consistent with the principle of overwhelming local advantage. You do not give the prey warning. You close the trap and then you announce it when escape is no longer possible. The Meridian sensor logs. Exhibit B1, provided under the Post-Incident Disclosure Agreement, tell a different story about the surprise. The Meridian detected the Veth lance at 0312 hours, 28 minutes before Orith Voss began his encirclement. The sensor officer's log entry for 0312 reads: 7 contacts, drive signatures consistent with Veth Dominion military fleet assets, consistent with interdiction lance deployment pattern, flagging to commander. The log entry for 0313 reads: Commander notified. Commander acknowledges. No course change, continuing survey pattern. There is no entry for 314. The next entry is at 0317 and it reads: Commander has convened all hands briefing in engineering bay. Survey pattern holding. The survey pattern held until 0338. 2 minutes before Orith Vase opened the trap, the Meridian's drive brought her to rest, as if she had simply stopped to take a reading. The all-hands briefing has no recording in the archive. There is, however, a damage control log that begins at 318 and runs through to a 611. It is Exhibit B4, and it is the most methodical document I have read in 42 years of archiving. I say that as a man who has a professional appreciation for methodical documents. At 0340 hours, the 7 ships of Skarath 7 completed their encirclement of the Meridian. The formation gave Orith Voss clean firing solutions on all aspects of the human frigate, forward, aft, boths, above, below, and the dorsal ventral axis. There was no angle from which the Meridian could run that would not put her in the arc of at least 2 Veth weapons. This is what the principle of overwhelming local advantage looks like in practice. It is thorough, it is professional, it is, against most opponents, decisive. Orith Vase hailed. The bridge recording, Exhibit A4, recovered from the wreck of the Skarath Blade, one of the 2 surviving ships, preserves his exact words. The translation is my own, working from the Dominion's own transcript. VDF vessel, Registry 7741, you are enclosed. Your drives are in our weapons cone. You will power down non-essential systems, transfer command authority to Claw Captain Orith Voss of the Veth Skarath Dominion Fleet Arm, and prepare your crew for boarding. Compliance is your only available option. Non-compliance will result in the destruction of your vessel. You have 4 minutes. There is a pause of approximately 11 seconds in the recording. Then Commander Voss responded. Her voice is flat. I have listened to the recording perhaps 30 times. In 30 listenings, I have not identified a single vocal marker that I would associate with fear, the translation again my own. Claw Captain, this is Commander Voss. I've noted your formation. I'd recommend you pull it back approximately 800 kilometers on the ventral axis before we proceed further. That's not a negotiating position, it's a safety advisory. Your flanking vessel is sitting inside the Meridian's emergency plasma venting radius. If I need to use that system for any reason in the next few hours, you'll lose that ship without either of us choosing to. A pause. I'll wait while you move her. Bridge recording preserves Voss's response to this. It is not, in the Dominion language, a polite response. It is, in essence, a reiteration of the 4-minute compliance window, with emphasis on the word destruction. Commander Voss acknowledged. The Meridian systems remained active. The survey pattern did not resume. What resumed at 341 hours was the damage control log. I want to describe the damage control log carefully, because it is the document that took me the longest to understand. And I think understanding it is necessary to understanding the rest of the incident. The damage control log is structured as a series of time-stamped entries, each one describing an action taken aboard the Meridian by a specific crew member or team. The entries are terse. They are written in a technical register that requires some familiarity with shipboard engineering to parse. When I first read it, I did not understand what I was reading. It looked like a routine maintenance log, systems being cycled, power flows being rerouted, conduit configurations being altered, coolant feeds being isolated or redirected. The kind of work that happens on any ship that has been running for 42 days and has accumulated the normal catalog of minor faults and deferred maintenance items. It took me 3 full reads before I understood that the Meridian had no deferred maintenance items. A survey log, Exhibit B2, shows a ship that was in excellent operational condition at 0300 hours on the day of the incident. The damage control log was not maintenance, it was reconfiguration, and the reconfiguration was not random. At 0341, the Meridian's engineering team began rerouting power from the dorsal sensor array to the lateral beam projectors, a non-standard configuration that would have increased the output of those projectors at the cost of reduced sensor coverage in the dorsal arc. At 0344, the aft missile launcher's targeting system was decoupled from the ship's primary fire control and linked instead to a secondary control station in the engineering bay. At 0347, the Meridian's coolant network for the primary drive was reconfigured to allow for controlled venting through a series of maintenance ports on the ship's ventral surface, ports that, in standard configuration, would be sealed during any drive operation. At 0351, the internal atmospheric system for the forward crew compartments was isolated from the rest of the ship and placed under local control at a station adjacent to the forward beam projectors. At 354, the ship's emergency power cells, 4 of them, designed to maintain life support and critical systems in the event of main power failure, were connected in series to the ship's secondary communications array in a configuration that Exhibit B4 describes with admirable understatement as non-standard. I want to be precise about the timeline here. Voss had given Commander Voss 4 minutes to comply, starting at 0340. By 354, 14 minutes later, Voss had not complied, and the 4-minute window had expired. Voss had not fired. Bridge recording from the Skarathblade shows his communications officer asking, at 0346, whether they should initiate fire. Voss told him to wait. The rationale is not preserved in audio. There is only a notation in the written bridge log that reads, awaiting compliance, target not maneuvering, awaiting compliance. My interpretation of this, offered tentatively, as behavioral analysis is outside my professional competence, is that Voss did not fire because he had not yet been given a reason to fire. The Meridian was not running. It was not raising shields aggressively, simply sitting in the center of his encirclement. apparently inert, apparently compliant in some future tense. He was waiting for a white flag that was not coming, while the crew of the Meridian quietly rebuilt their ship around them. At 0357, the damage control log records a 17-second pause, the longest gap in any section of the document. Then a single entry. All stations report ready, Commander acknowledges. At 0358, the bridge recording from the Scareth blade captures Orith Voss, issuing a final compliance demand. His tone, the translation suggests, is no longer patient. VDF vessel, your compliance window has passed. I am commencing weapons charge. You will power down immediately, or I will fire. There is a quality to the recording at this point. A background frequency shift that my technical advisors tell me is consistent with active weapons, charging in the Veth-Skarath fire control system. 7 ships, all weapons charging. The encirclement was complete. The trap was closed. Commander Voss responded at 0358 plus 40 seconds. Her voice, in the recording captured by the Scareth blade's passive array, is the same temperature it was 18 minutes earlier. I've been watching your formation since 0312, Claw Captain. I know where every one of your ships is. I'd like to walk you through what happens next, because I don't think your intelligence file prepared you for it, and I'd rather you understand it before it starts. There is a pause of 4 seconds. I'm going to vent plasma from the Meridian's ventral maintenance ports. The ventral flanking ship, the one I warned you about, will lose propulsion, probably life support. That's not my preference. Pull it back now, and it doesn't happen. Another pause. While you're deciding, my forward beams are going to come up on non-standard power draw. Your targeting systems will log it as a power fault, not a weapons charge, because they're calibrated for standard human ship configurations. They're not calibrated for this configuration. I rebuilt the draw profile about 12 minutes ago. Pause of 3 seconds. The aft missile targeting is running from engineering now, not the bridge. Your intercept systems are looking at the bridge. That's the other thing your file probably didn't cover. 4 seconds. Pull your ventral flanking ship back. That's the only offer I'm going to make. The bridge recording from the Scareth blade shows a less second silence. Then, Orith Voss's weapons officer speaking, in a fast, low register that my translation renders as. Claw Captain, I'm reading a power anomaly in the target. It's not matching our fire control profile. I don't have a clean classification. She, on what she's. Fass ordered fire at 0359. I have reconstructed what happened next from 4 sources. The bridge recording from the Scareth blade, partial bridge recording recovered from the wreck of the Scareth claw, the sensor logs from the Meridian, and the damage control log. None of these sources, individually, gives a complete picture. Together they give something approaching one, though there are gaps. Moments where events happen faster than any of the recording systems could properly capture, and where the after-the-fact analysis can only approximate what occurred. What is not in dispute, and what I will state plainly at the outset, is this. Of the 7 ships of Scareth 7, 5 were destroyed or rendered non-operational within the first 19 minutes of the engagement. The 6th, the Scareth Claw, was operationally capable, but had sustained damage to her drive system that reduced her to maneuvering speed and would take 11 hours to repair. The 7th, the Scareth Blade, Orith Voss's command ship, was the only vessel to emerge from the engagement with full operational capacity. Of the crew complement of the 5 destroyed ships, totaled roughly 380. By my estimate based on the Veth-Skarath standard crew tables in Annexure D4, the survivors numbered fewer than 40, recovered by the Endless Mercy 9 hours later. The Meridian sustained significant internal damage, primarily to her forward compartments, and lost 4 crew members. Commander Voss was not among them. The engagement lasted 19 minutes. I want that number to be clear, because it is not a number that conveys itself easily. 7 warships against 1 frigate. 19 minutes. I have reviewed the engagement records of every comparable incident in the Conclave's open database. Cases in which a single vessel was engaged by a significantly superior force, in fleet space, without possibility of reinforcement. The median duration before the single vessel either surrendered, was destroyed, or broke contact is 4 hours and 20 minutes, and in the overwhelming majority of cases, the outcome is a surrender or a destruction. The Meridian did neither. The Meridian in 19 minutes had effectively ended the engagement from inside the encirclement. At 0359, HFY ordered fire, and 3 things happened approximately simultaneously. The Meridian's ventral maintenance ports opened, the plasma venting that Commander Voss had described. The emergency thermal dump from the primary drive's coolant circuit routed through those ports in the non-standard configuration the damage control log had recorded at 0347. Caught the ventral flanking ship, Scarethfang, across her port thruster cluster and sensor spine. The Scarethfang did not explode. She lost power sequentially, thruster array first, then navigation, then shields, then life support on the lower decks. The Scareth Blade's bridge recording captures Orith Voss's communications officer reporting the Scarethfang's status. Fang is down, Claw Captain. Drive failure. She's dark on the lower decks. This report arrives at approximately the same moment as the second event. The Meridian's lateral beam projectors came up. Not standard sequence. Not the graduated power increase that Veth Scareth targeting systems are calibrated to read as an imminent weapons. Discharge and respond to accordingly. The power draw reconfigured at OSU-341 produced a signature that the Scareth Blade's weapons officer had already reported he couldn't classify. The beams fired on the starboard flanking ship, the Scareth Reach, before the Veth Scareth fire control systems had completed their threat classification cycle. The Scareth Reach's shields were up but not yet adjusted to the angle or power level of the incoming fire. First beam struck her forward sensor array. The second struck her weapons bay. The third struck her drive section. The Scareth Blade's bridge recording does not capture the Scareth Reach's final status, because within the next 40 seconds, the Scareth Blade's crew had enough of their own problems to occupy the recording. The third event, at SO-359, was the aft missile launch. The targeting was running from engineering, as Commander Voss had described. The Veth Scareth intercept systems, the automated point defense grid that every Dominion warship runs continuously against incoming missile fire, oriented toward the Meridian's bridge and forward control spaces, because that is where a standard fire control system would be. They were not oriented toward engineering. The 2 missiles out of the Meridian's aft launchers found the Scareth Wing's port flank with no intercept. The Scareth Wing lasted 6 minutes. Her bridge recording, partially recovered from the wreck, shows a crew trying to understand what had just happened to their intercept grid. They did not figure it out before she went dark. In the first 40 seconds of the engagement, the Meridian had disabled 1 ship and critically damaged 2 others. She had done this without breaking the encirclement, without maneuvering, without doing anything that the Veth Scareth Lance's sensors would have classified as combat preparatory, until the moment it was too late to intercept. She had done it from the inside of a closed trap, using systems reconfigured in the 26 minutes between detection and engagement. 6 minutes. The Dominion's pre-mission briefing, Exhibit A3, allocates a standard combat preparation time of 1 hour for a warship of the Meridian's class. The assumption being that 41 crew require an hour to bring a vessel from survey mode to combat mode. Commander Voss had done it 26 minutes in a non-standard configuration that made the result unreadable by the Dominion's targeting systems, while simultaneously calculating which of the 7 encircling ships posed the most immediate threat to the venting operation, and addressing that ship first. The damage control log does not contain an entry for 0359. The next entry after the 0357 readiness report is at 0401, and it reads, in its entirety. Forward beam capacitors drawing at 140% rated load. Engineering monitoring, acceptable. Not alarmed. Not requesting pull back, monitoring acceptable. I will continue the reconstruction, but I want to note something before I do. The Veth Scareth Dominion's bridge recordings, particularly those from the Scareth Blade, survived the engagement with her recording systems intact. Contain, in the first 4 minutes of the engagement, a quality of sound that I find difficult to describe in purely archival terms. I have said that I am not a man who loses sleep over documents. What I mean is that I am professionally accustomed to reading about terrible things and remaining, in the necessary clinical sense, detached from them. That detachment has been useful to me. It has allowed me to process 60,000 records without being consumed by any of them. The Veth bridge recordings compromised that detachment. Not because of the violence, I have read worse, but because of the asymmetry of it. On the Veth recordings, there is escalating sound, voices rising, reports coming faster, damage updates overlapping, a recognizable spiral into the chaos that follows when a plan that was supposed to be certain begins to fail. On the Meridian sensor logs and damage control log, which run parallel to those recordings, there is almost no noise at all. A series of terse entries, systems performing within expected parameters, load levels monitored. One note at 0403 reads, starboard forward coolant feed running warm, engineer deval monitoring. That is the closest thing to urgency in the Meridian's logs during the entire engagement. It is the contrast that stays with you. I have reviewed the audio from the Scareth blade perhaps 15 times for technical purposes, attempting to establish precise timings. Each time, somewhere below the professional level, the difference in temperature between the two sides of that engagement. And each time, I think about that notation in Annexure D7, the incomplete assessment of what Class 28 means for fleet engagements. And I think that whoever was supposed to complete that assessment would have had a difficult time finding language for what they needed to say. Let me continue. 0401, with 3 of his 7 ships disabled or destroyed, Oreth Voss attempted to collapse the remaining 4 ships onto the Meridian. A standard response to an encirclement failure, concentrating force to overwhelm the target at close range. The Scareth blade's bridge recording shows this decision being made clearly and promptly. The tactic is sound in principle. In practice, that the 4 remaining ships move from their encirclement positions toward the center of the formation, which meant that for a period of time, their drives would be oriented toward or across the Meridian's beam projector arcs. The Meridian sensor log records the formation change at 0401. The next damage control log entry at 0402 reads, lateral beam projectors re-angled to forward port quarter. Forward beam standing by. Commander has solution on inbound Scareth blade. 1 entry later, at 0403. Aft launcher reloaded. Engineering confirms firing solution on inbound port flank vessel. The Meridian did not wait for the collapse to complete. She engaged the inbound ships during the maneuver, while their drives were committed and their evasive capacity was constrained. Scareth spine. The port flank vessel took 2 missiles in her drive section during the approach and lost forward maneuverability. She coasted past the Meridian on a ballistic arc and spent the rest of the engagement drifting, unable to bring her weapons to bear at any angle that mattered. The Scareth Reach, which had taken beam fire in the first seconds of the engagement and was running on partial power, attempted to close to weapons range and achieved it. Briefly, her weapons fire struck the Meridian's forward compartments. The Meridian's damage control log records at 0406. Breach in forward compartments 2 and 3. Emergency seals engaged. 4 crew in breach zone. No response. Commander notified. Forward atmospheric isolation holding. 4 crew. Killed by the only weapons fire that struck the Meridian during the engagement, from a ship that was already critically damaged and had perhaps 3 minutes of operational life left when she made the approach. The damage control log does not pause at this entry. The next line, at 0406 plus 30 seconds, reads, lateral beam retargeting. Commander has solution on Scareth blade. Oreth Voss's command ship came to weapons range at 0408. By that point, his lance consisted of the Scareth blade at full capacity, the Scareth claw at reduced capacity, and 3 other vessels that were dark, drifting, or destroyed. He fired everything the Scareth blade had. The Meridian's shields took the first salvo and partially absorbed the second. The damage control log records shield degradation at 0408 and notes the specific emitter grid that had taken the most load, and notes further that the crew member responsible for that section of the grid, had already begun the rerouting necessary to compensate. Panicking. Not requesting orders. Already compensating. The Scareth Claw, attempting to support Orith Voss, came around to the Meridian's aft quarter at 0411. She caught both aft missiles and the secondary communications array surge. The 4 emergency power cells connected in series to the secondary array, the configuration the damage control log had described at 0354 as non-standard. It was non-standard because it turned the communications array into a directed electromagnetic pulse emitter capable of blinding a ship's sensor and targeting systems at close range for a period estimated at between 4 and 9 minutes. It did not damage the Scareth Claw structurally, blinded her. For 6 minutes, long enough for the Meridian to address the Scareth blade, and long enough for the Scareth Claw's own damage control crew to restore partial sensor function, but not weapons lock. The Scareth Claw was flying blind in a debris field. The Scareth blade's final weapons exchange with the Meridian is recorded in Exhibit A4 from 0411 to 0417. I will not detail every exchange. The short version is that the Meridian sustained further shield damage and a secondary breach in an equipment bay that had already been evacuated at Commander Voss's order 11 minutes earlier. The Scareth blade sustained beam damage to her forward weapons array and a drive hit that reduced her velocity control. At 0417, Orith Voss broke off and broadcast a general recall on the Dominion Fleet emergency frequency. The Scareth blade's bridge recording captures this moment with clarity. His communications officer responded by asking whether he should hail the Meridian for terms. The recording captures Orith Voss telling him, after a pause of several seconds, to do so. The hail went out at 0418. Commander Voss acknowledged it at 0419. Her voice is the same temperature it has been for the entire recording. The translation. Claw Captain. Your recall is noted. Get your medical vessels in here. You have crew who need them. I'll hold position. Don't come back without a diplomatic packet and a very good explanation. She did not say anything else. She did not fire again. The Meridian held position in the center of what had been the encirclement for 9 hours and 12 minutes until the Veth Scareth medical vessel, Endless Mercy, arrived and began recovery operations on the crew of the destroyed ships. The damage control log continues for the entire 9-hour wait, recording the ongoing work of the Meridian's crew. Repairs to the breached compartments, shield emitter recalibration, a careful assessment of the forward beam capacitors that had run at 140% load for 10 minutes. At 0832, there is an entry that reads, Commander requests status on forward capacitors, engineering, holding, no replacement required. At 1021, there is an entry that reads, Commander requests coffee status. The entry after it reads, Galley, operational. That is the only reference to food or drink in the entire damage control log. 0628. 9 hours and 12 minutes after she had acknowledged Orith Voss's recall. Commander Voss's voice appears in the Meridian sensor log, first time since the engagement. The log records a single transmission outbound from the Meridian on a Dominion standard frequency. Endless Mercy, this is VDF Meridian. I have a precise grid of debris coordinates for your recovery teams. Transmitting now. The transmission that followed was a full sensor sweep of the engagement zone, marked with the positions of every piece of wreckage, large enough to contain a survivor. The Endless Mercy's own log, Exhibit G1, provided by the Dominion Trade Liaison under the Post-Incident Disclosure Agreement, records receipt of this transmission at 0629 and notes that it materially reduced the time required for the recovery operation. Without it, the Endless Mercy's crew estimated they would have missed perhaps a third of the debris fields entirely. I note this without comment. The depositions collected aboard the Endless Mercy, Exhibit G2 through G9, are the primary first-person Veth Scareth record of the incident. There are 14 of them. The deponents include 3 junior officers from the Scareth Wing, 2 weapons techs from the Scareth Spine, the navigation officer from the Scareth Reach, the communications officer from the Scareth Blade, and 7 crew members of mixed specialties from the Scareth Fang. Orith Voss is not among them. He survived. The Scareth Blade's crew list in Exhibit G1 confirms this, but he is not listed among the deponents, and no explanation is given. I have my own interpretation of this absence, but it is an interpretation, and I am an archivist, not an analyst. The depositions share a quality that I want to note because I think it is relevant to understanding why this record was sealed. Every deponent was asked, at some point in their deposition, a variant of the same question. At what point in the engagement did you understand what was happening? The answers vary in their specific content, but not in their essential nature. None of the deponents describe a moment of understanding that came before the engagement was effectively decided. The navigation officer from the Scareth Reach, one of the more articulate depositions, answered the question as follows. I understood we were losing when the Fang went dark. I understood we had lost when Orith Voss ordered the collapse and the missiles came up from their aft launcher while we were in mid-maneuver. But I did not understand what had happened to us until the Endless Mercy played back the meridians. Damage control log for me, and I saw that she had spent 26 minutes before the engagement, putting herself into a configuration we had no file. I understood then that she had seen us before we thought we were visible, and that by the time Orith Voss hailed her, she was already done planning. She was just waiting for us to start. One of the weapons technicians from the Scareth Spine gave a longer answer. He had served in the Dominion Fleet Arm for 14 years, he said, and he had been in 4 prior engagements. And in all 4 of them, there had been a point at which he could feel the shape of what was happening, a moment where the tactical picture resolved into something legible, and he understood his role in it. In the Kael'vor incident, that moment never came. The picture kept changing, he said. And every time it changed it was because something came from a direction we weren't watching, or at an angle we hadn't anticipated, or from a system we had classified as non-combat. I spent the first 8 minutes of that engagement attempting to file what was happening into a category I recognized. I never succeeded. I don't think the category exists. Another deponent, one of the junior officers from the Scareth Wing, whose ship was destroyed in the 6th minute of the engagement, was asked whether at any point during the incident he had the impression that the human crew was in difficulty. He considered the question for a long time. The deposition log marks the pause as 22 seconds. Then, I heard her voice once. The general frequency before the engagement started. She sounded like a crew chief giving an equipment advisory at the start of a standard watch. That was the only impression I had of the human crew in the entire incident. He paused again. I think they were probably fine. The communications officer from the Scareth Blade answered more briefly. The deposition record shows the question, and then a pause marked as 12 seconds, and then I kept waiting for her voice to change. In the recordings, you can hear how loud we got. Kept listening to her side and waiting for it to get louder too. It never did. That is what I cannot account for. It never did. I think that is the sentence this record is about. I think it is the sentence that the people who sealed it were trying to decide what to do with. The Kael'vor Outer Transit Incident. The designation assigned to it by the Conclave's Records Division, which had to call it something in order to file it, was the subject of a joint diplomatic session between the Orvith Sector Council, the Veth Scareth Dominion Trade Liaison, and representatives of the Human Voluntary Defense Force, approximately 6 months after the incident. The session record is Annexures F1. I will summarize it briefly, because the session itself is less interesting than the context in which the sealing decision was made, but the outcome is relevant. The Dominion paid reparations. The amount is redacted in the copy I received. The Dominion formally retracted the interdiction order and acknowledged that the Meridian's mission profile had been civilian survey work, not intelligence gathering, which was the justification they had filed internally for the operation. The human VDF accepted the reparations and did not file for further action, on the condition that the Dominion formally update its classification of human vessels in the outer transit corridor to Consalmf, survey class low threat, to a designation that is rendered in the translation as contact class undetermined, is I think, the most diplomatically careful way anyone has ever written down the words. We do not know what these ships can do. The Dominion agreed to the classification change. The record was sealed at the same session, by joint consent, under a provision that allows for sealing. When all parties agree that public access would create more instability than the underlying facts warrant. I spent some time, during my assessment, trying to understand why the Vethskarath Dominion agreed to the sealing. Reparation payments are not rare in cross-polity incidents. The embarrassment of having paid them fades. But I think, again, offered as interpretation, not archival fact, that what the Dominion was most motivated to conceal was not the loss itself, precise record of how it happened. The damage control log. The 26 minutes of quiet reconfiguration. The power draw signature that their targeting systems couldn't classify. The aft launcher running from engineering. The maintenance ports venting in a non-standard direction. While the encirclement was still forming, they had commissioned 7 ships and 380 crew to resolve a low-risk asset acquisition, and what they had encountered, in place of a logistics officer in a survey frigate, was something they had no category for. A woman who had apparently looked at her ship and seen, not its standard configuration, but every possible non-standard configuration, filed them, begun selecting the most useful one the moment she understood that she was going to need them. They had no file for that. They did not want anyone else to know they had no file for that. They did not want anyone to know that the file they did have, the Class 28, biological origin notation, incomplete, unassessed for 11 years, was the file that mattered, and that they had chosen not to finish reading it. I understand that motivation. I have some sympathy for it. The difficulty with sealing a record that documents a specific kind of capability is that the sealing does not change the capability. The Meridian still exists in the registry. Commander Voss served 11 more years in the VDF before retiring. Her record, Exhibit C2, remains as described. The Vethskarath Dominion never filed Tiamant Internikinitikasi against Humson Vensons. The contact class, undetermined. Designation they accepted at the session has, to my knowledge, never been formally revised. The record does not say whether the Dominion eventually completed its formal assessment of what Class 28 means for fleet engagements. I checked the accessible portion of their public registry. I found no such document. It may exist under a seal I cannot access. It may not exist at all. I am required, at the conclusion of a sealed record assessment, to make a recommendation on final disposition. Reclassify as open access, maintain seal escalate for council review, or transfer to historical archive with restricted access. I have made my recommendation in the formal document. I will not reproduce it here, as the formal document is itself under administrative review, and reproducing it would be premature. What I will say for this assessment is the following. 40 years ago, Claw Captain Orth Voss of the Vethskarath Dominion assembled 7 warships in the Kael-Vor outer transit, because his intelligence file described a low-risk target. His intelligence file was accurate about the ship's armament, her crew complement, drive rating, and her mission profile. It was inaccurate about one thing, and the one thing it was inaccurate about was the thing that mattered. 41-person crew from a Class 28 Death World is, in any meaningful sense, actually capable of when the situation requires it of them. They are capable, apparently, of seeing you before you see them, of spending the gap between detection and engagement, not in preparation for flight, in distress signaling, or in the calculation of what terms they can offer, but in the systematic reconfiguration of their vessel into something you have no targeting data for. They are capable of doing this in 26 minutes, without noise, without panic, in a manner precise enough that every system they touch performs within acceptable parameters for the duration that follows. They are capable of telling you, in advance, what is about to happen to you, in a flat voice, with the practical suggestion that you move one of your ships before the venting starts, because they are not interested in killing more of your people than the situation requires. They are capable, in the aftermath, transmitting you a grid of your own debris fields, because they have better sensor coverage than your medical vessel, and they appear to have decided that your crew's lives are worth preserving. despite the fact that you just tried to take their ship. I do not know what to make of that last fact. It is not the kind of fact that fits cleanly into an archival assessment. It does not fit cleanly into most categories I have available. The Veth Scareth communications officer's answer stays with me. I kept waiting for her voice to change. I've spent 4 months reading this record, and that is the sentence I come back to most. Not because it describes capability, because it describes something adjacent to capability that I lack the precise vocabulary for. The quality in Commander Voss's voice that never changed, from the first safety advisory to the last transmission to the endless mercy. The quality that I suspect is the actual answer to the incomplete assessments in Annex 7, if anyone had been in a position to complete it. I will file my recommendation. I will retire for 6 months. The record will go where it goes. I do know this much. No one who has read this document in full, the sensor logs, the damage control log, the bridge recordings, the depositions from the crew of the Endless Mercy, has subsequently filed an interdiction request against a human vessel. I have checked. The joint session was attended by 11 senior officials across the 3 polities. None of them have. Deputy Administrator who assigned me this record has not. I have not, but I was not previously in a position to do so. I am not drawing a conclusion from this. I am noting a pattern. Noting patterns is what archivists do. There is one further pattern I will note, because it has occupied me, and I cannot find a better place to put it. The Meridian's crew of 41 were not, by any measure in the Dominion's file, an exceptional military unit. They were a survey crew. Their qualifications were navigational, scientific, engineering-focused. Commander Voss had 19 years of service, but the majority of those years were in non-combat roles, as the Dominion's own record correctly identified. The engagement at Kael'vor was not, in other words, a case of the Dominion encountering the best-trained warfighters humanity had available and losing to them. It was a case of the Dominion encountering a survey crew in a frigate on a mapping mission and losing to them. I have spent some time considering what that implies about the trained warfighters. I have not arrived at a conclusion that I can state in archival language. I have arrived at a conclusion that I can state only as follows. I am glad that the Dominion did not file a second interdiction request. And I suspect, though I cannot document it, that the Dominion is glad too. I will note one more. The Meridian returned to the Kael'vor secondary depot 11 days after the incident. Survey log, Exhibit B2, shows that she completed her navigational survey of the outer corridor's debris field on the return leg. During the transit back to depot, she filed the survey data on arrival. It was complete. Not one of the 42 survey waypoints was outstanding. Commander Voss signed the survey completion report at 1400 hours on the day of arrival. The signature block indicates no anomalies. The report notation reads, Survey complete. Recommend the Kael'vor outer corridor debris field for standard transit designation. Environmental parameters within safe limits for commercial vessel passage. She had 40 days of data. She completed the last 2 waypoints after the engagement. She turned in a clean report. I have been an archivist for 31 years, and I have read 60,000 records, and I have never before found myself sitting at my desk at an hour I do not usually keep, reading a survey completion report, feeling something I would not know how to file. I feel it now. I will note it. I will finish the assessment. I will go home. The record stands as found.